Can you all see my presentation now? Yes? Okay,
Yes.
Thank you so much, Sinamar, for the introduction. I'm gonna skip the introduction because you're already here. The introduction to our paper, which is titled Environmental, Evaluating the Effectiveness of Environmental Governance in the Amazon, and it's composed by 8 members, as Sinamar mentioned. So basically, this is our agenda for today. It's kind of busy, so hopefully we'll have time to cover it all. And the plan is to provide an introduction. First is going to be Dr. Press, and then I'm going to go more deep into the paper itself. And then we are going to break into breakout rooms. So you get a little bit of a taste of each case study that we are going to present, that we cover in our paper. And then we're going to go back to the main group, and we are going to cover the conclusions of our paper. And we are going to have some time for Q&A. So having said that, I'm gonna let Dr. Peirce give a brief introduction to the group and the paper, and then I'll come back to talk about the introduction to the paper. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Pili. So my job is to be brief. I'm just going to give you all some context on where this paper come from. Pili and the rest of the group will tell you about the paper. But this is a result of my graduate students coming to me 2-3 years ago saying, we want to have bi-monthly meetings and you should be there, meaning me. So this was not my idea. This is not something I led. This is a student-initiated set of activities that has led us to this paper. I'm very proud of this group that they have, like the rest of you, been fighting through COVID, travel restrictions, and other kinds of things to find productive things to do in a highly collaborative fashion, in a very comparative fashion across their countries, as you're going to see, to produce not only proposals, they've been recently funded by TCD, they may bring some of that up, but also to collaboratively write papers. And so I'm very pleased to be here in what I consider an eminently appropriate type of presentation for a Tropilunch, because it's student-led, it reflects a lot of student initiative, and so I'm very happy to be here to listen along with the rest of you. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Pili and the rest of the group. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Peirce, for the introduction. And now what I'm going to do is just to talk a little bit more in detail of the details of why we decided to write a paper on environmental governance in the Amazon. So for starters, we noticed that previous literature in the Amazon did identify the constraints that impede effective governance, such as stakeholder resistance to regulations or inequalities that cause conflict among stakeholders, but the focus of this literature tended to be narrow and is centered in one type of approach. So also the previous governance work in the Amazon tends to pay attention to single causes without really offering a comparative analysis among the different communities in the Amazon. And then secondly, more generally, when we think in terms of the environmental governance literature as a whole, we also notice that there is a lot of very well-developed governance literature that offers different perspectives on what governance is and how it should be achieved. And I'm sure that many of you here already know this kind of literature, such as community-based natural resource management, multi-level governance, global governance. But this literature does not treats the idea of governance in a more applied way. And it hasn't been until recently that we have found applied frameworks that attempt to evaluate the effectiveness of governance. So what we did to sort of help address these gaps that I just mentioned is that we develop a comparative analysis of governance, environmental governance in the Amazon, following these steps that you see here in the PowerPoint. So first, we built from these more recent frameworks that evaluate environmental governance that I'm gonna cover in a second. And we use them to identify a common evaluation framework of governance of our own making. Then we review 5 cases in the Amazon where environmental governance has encountered difficulties that undermine its effectiveness. And for each of these cases, we identified up to 5 explanations for why environmental governance has proven to be ineffective. And once we had identified these explanations of ineffective governance, we applied our own evaluation framework to identify which criteria for effective environmental governance were not met in each explanation. And then finally, we considered these results to draw conclusions about effective governance across the 5 cases. And this sounds messy, and it was a very messy process. It took us months to reach to this methodology and objectives. And I hope that throughout the presentation, it will become a little bit more clear, but I wanted to give you a heads up of what you're about to see. So what I'm gonna do now is to briefly cover the 3 frameworks of evaluation of environmental governance that we have relied on to build our own. And the first one is this framework by Bennett and Satterfield that came in 2018. And basically, they provide 4 general objectives of governance, and each objective has a list of attributes. And they end up with a quite lengthy list of attributes of governance, 22 attributes. And they argue that all 4 objectives, which is effective, equitable, responsible, and robust, should be met in order for governance to be effective. And then we have the second environment framework to evaluate governance from 2019 from Waddington et al. The authors use what they call the PITA framework, which stands for participation, inclusion, transparency, and accountability. And they use these, so to speak, items to evaluate citizen engagement on public services in low and middle income countries through this PITA framework. And then the last framework that we use, that we found out thanks to Marlies, who I think is using it for her own work, is the Viseo and Pinheiro framework and many others that came very recently in 2020. And it actually, it comes from the Inter-American Development Bank, and it focuses on Latin America. And it provides pillars of governance that contain 8 items that have to be met. And we thought that these first 4 pillars, with all their subsequent conceptualizations, are the ones that relate to our case. So we end up with these items or criteria for each framework that you can see here in this figure. And what we did was a conceptual analysis by which we look at each concept that the framework provided, and we match the criteria that were similar among the same frameworks. So, for example, we consider that inform, learning, monitoring, and information and access to information belongs to the same category of access to information and knowledge. And we did the same thing with the other items that you see, or the other criteria that you see here in this figure, and we end up with our own governance evaluation criteria across the 3 frameworks that I just covered. And we have a total of 11 criteria, and they include things that you can, I'm not gonna go through them all, but basically transparency, participation, justice and rights, etc. So before we move on to so you can hear more about the case studies and get a taste of what at least one of the case studies covers and how they explain ineffective governance. What I want to do is to make this a little bit more participatory, is to have you fill out a Microsoft form. So the only thing that you need to answer, if you're willing to do this, is to tell us in your experience, and most of you have experience with fieldwork and research, or one of the two, are the top 5 governance criteria that are often not met according to your experience. So I'm gonna share here in the chat the link to the Microsoft form. Oops. Can you see it? The link?
Yes.
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 Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So please go ahead and fill out that form, and then at the end of the presentation, we are gonna compare your results with our own results, and just for fun. Obviously, it's not an exhaustive inquiry, but if you can, please take 2 minutes while I actually get to do the breakout rooms.
You are the host, Pilar.
Hello, good evening, everyone. So we're here previously with Pilar. We are here to let you know a little bit about the paper that we wrote, evaluating the effectiveness of environmental governance in the Amazon, where we are doing a comparative analysis of cases from Bolivia, Brazil, Colombia, and Peru. Today, I'm going to show you my own case. So my case is related to Bolivia and Brazil, and is called Governance of Dams in the Binational Frontier on the Upper Madeira watershed. So for the ones who doesn't know the background about the Upper Madeira Basin, so the Upper Madeira Basin, as you can see in here, is one of the biggest tributaries for the Amazon basin, and actually the Madeira River born in the confluences on the Mamoré River and the Beni River in Bolivia. And what is the issue in this area? The issue in this area that there are already 2 big dams built in the Brazilian part of the Madeira River, and these dams have been affecting tremendously the Bolivian territory. And also under the same plan, there are 2 big dams planned to be built. One is a binational dam, the Cachoeira Ribeirão Preto, which is between Bolivia and Brazil, and the other one is the Cachoeira Esperança Dam, which is in the Bolivian territory. So the governance issues that we identify are basically the planning processes. So because this the planning process has been the lack of recognition of the social environmental impacts of the Brazilian dams in the Bolivian territory. These impacts could be exacerbated by the construction of these other 2 dams, the dam that I already showed you previously. Through research processes for about 3 years, we have been identifying the main stakeholders in the Upper Madeira region in this area. And one of them are community organizations, municipal leaders, local association of farmers, extractivists, and fisheries. Also the construction company and national government. We also did an analysis of power and interest matrix, and then show that local stakeholders, especially the community organization and association, they are opposed to the dams. And those groups are largely disenfranchised by the national governments in the planning processes. That is mainly because these other 2 stakeholders, the municipal leaders and the construction company, are in favor of the dams. So the stakeholder opposed to the dams, they mentioned the importance of conserving the aquatic and terrestrial biodiversity in the social ecological system, as well as the water sources for the communities. And the The stakeholders who are in favor emphasize that the dams will bring jobs and cheap energy to the region, but several studies have been shown that this is not the case in many of the communities that are impacted by the big dams in the territory. So the stakeholder analysis makes evident that national governance and stakeholders in favor of the dams have more power and influence over the planning processes, which impedes effective environmental governance in this area. It is important, however, to unpack what is really happening in this social ecological system. So in here, I just want to show you that there are many researchers and research that have been done and evaluating how are the impacts, the actual impacts, ecological and social impacts that have been caused by the Brazilian dams. In here you can see, like in 2014, it's been like a big flood in the area, and some researchers and also the local people said that this was exacerbated by the construction, especially of Girau Dam. However, the Brazilian government denies all the time that Giraus have been caused any negative effect on the Bolivian side. So why governance is not effective in the region? We had been identified 5 possible explanations. The first one concerns the Bolivian state, which has exhibited authoritarian tendencies toward local stakeholders. The Bolivian government between 2006 and 2019 has been characterized by being highly centralized and authoritarian with top-down approaches to policies. And also the official government discourse has been changed through time. We can see that, like, if we look back, in 2009, when the Bolivian government sought to have Brazilian pay for the impacts of the Santo Antonio and Girau dams. However, after that, there was like a silence until the beginning of 2016, when the Bolivian government agreed to go forward with the binational Ribeirão Preto and Cachola Esperanza Dam. And all of this occurs without consulting with the communities already affected by Santo Antonio and Girau dams, and despite warnings by scientists and conservation NGOs about negative social and ecological impacts, including loss of fisheries, flooring, and health threats. The second explanation is concerning to the high-level negotiations between national governments to advance infrastructure projects. So the negotiations between these governments inhibit cross-scale communication, excluding local stakeholders, hinder their participation, and result in a lack of transparency. In 2014, a major flood caused by the retaining water behind Girau and Santo Antonio led to a loss of livelihoods in many Bolivian communities, but the lack of an enforcement mechanism in agreements between Bolivia and Brazil made it possible for Bolivia to seek reparation for the harm caused by the built dam. The third explanation is concerning the lack of sympathy by the Bolivian state for the concerns of lowland population. The Bolivian government was founded upon a highland indigenous identity and improved vision of social services to many poor population. It excluded the lowland indigenous culture. The Bolivian government sought to distribute land in the lowland to highlands population via agricultural colonization as an economic strategy and a political strategy to gain votes in the lowland departments. So many governments in Bolivia just saw the Amazon as an empty space that needs to be conquered, which is not the case. And this just reflects the lack of understanding about the social ecological system of the Amazon. The fourth is the Bolivian state had pursued a problematic approach to planning by meddling in lowland institutions rather than allowing stakeholders to deliberate autonomously. Even though Bolivia has a law of autonomy and decentralization since 2010, until today, this didn't go into effective. But the Bolivian state has centralized power. The law was used by the state to intervene in local deliberations and hereby cope lowland institutions. So this has resulted in the division of the local stakeholders against each other, like divide and conquer thing, with negative consequences for effective environmental governance, including loss of legitimacy, lack of coordination, and more. And the final explanations concern Bolivia's polarized political context, with a strong ruling party and fragmented political opposition, which has undermined trust among political factions. So there is a little hope that policies and strategies will change this time regarding the construction of the dams of the Madeira River, because in the elections of the October 2020, so the Morales party won the elections again. So yeah, we don't know what's going to happen next, but we could say that the environmental policies won't change too much. So yeah, basically we have these 5 reasons why the government is not effective in the region. So thank you very much for here, and we will continue discussing this topic in the main group. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you for joining in the Brazil case, named infrastructure planning without indigenous consent in the southern Amazonas, northern Rondônia, so the Brazilian Amazon. And it's this case is part of my dissertation topic that's focused in free prior informed consent. It's new principles of the indigenous rights issued in Convention 169 during the International Labor Organizations for the United Nations in 1989. And basically, the indigenous people and tribals have the right to be consulted in projects, infrastructure projects or development projects that you impacted them. So this consultation should be prior the implementation. So actually during the planning phase, and they need to have the most adequate and accurate information to take their decisions. And the consultation should be in a good faith without manipulation or coercion. And the indigenous should have their concept, so their decision should be respect from the developers. And in Brazil, basically in 2002, Brazil ratified the ILO 169. In 2004, those principles were turned in the Brazil legal system. So, and we have a lot of problems involve the rights of consultation, and even the one specific experience of free prior informed consent in Brazil. So historically, indigenous people have been impacted during the colonization and post-colonization, and they still struggling to have their rights be respected. And we have in the last years many development projects proposed to the Amazon. The most known is there's project try to connect through infrastructure the whole South America, and many projects infrastructure projects are focused in the Amazon. So the most known case recently is the Belmont Dam. where the indigenous didn't have true consultation under the ILO 169. So we have a big problem about indigenous people participation in those projects. And we have a huge importance in the participation of the indigenous. Of course, they take decision in their own lands and respect their tradition, their way to take decision, their agents, so their social political institution. And of course, a huge discussion about their rights, their legal, their fundamental rights, because they are the original people. And we have some experience under consultations using free prior informed consent from Peru, Bolivia, and most cases they are controversial, the application of the indigenous rights, but we can say that these two have been used as a negotiation tool. And the specific case here, my dissertation is focusing how the indigenous people have mobilized for free prior informed consent, and how specific allies in the state, for example, Indigenous National Foundation, FUNAI, and even the Federal Public Ministry, and specific NGOs that have been supported the indigenous rights for free prior informed consent. This is a more broad context of the study. So, and the specific region is in the Amazonas state, as you can see here, and the BR 319 highway connect the capital of Rondônia, Porto Velho, to the capital of Amazonas, Manaus. Here you can see better in the left side, and the proposal is paving all this highway, connect those capitals, and you can see I have some other proposals, roads here, and you have the well-known the Transamazônica that will be connect in this region. In the context, we have read many protect areas. Those in light brown or green, they are conservation units, both state and federal ones under coordination. And in light, in pink here, you can see indigenous lands. The next slide will show them better. So here I will highlight the first two violations, and I will show the other three violations quickly. And the context here, zoning, you can see many indigenous lands in this region here, in this work of Ferrante and collaborators. So, and some of those, the most are regularized indigenous lands that you can see in green, and you have different phase of regularization, so demarcation of those indigenous lands here. And the government initially proposed like 5 indigenous land, but we have here more than 60 indigenous lands in this buffer area. In the first violation, it's about the transparency, the lack in transparency, as the National Transport Infrastructure Department, the NIT, issued a public notice to pave a middle stretch of these the roads, and the Federal Public Ministry, they moved against the NIT because it didn't follow the requirements of the environmental impact assessment. So basically, the federal public minister said that they need to act in a bad faith, creating deceptive expectations. And we have this lacking in information and how to apply the free prior informed consent with those target indigenous lands. And I would say that they even have no transparent information how they deliver the social component of the environmental impact assessment in this area, and either about some proposed enforcement stations that should to the BR 319 should have here. So the second violation is about the hostility that this current government have used over the indigenous and over the indigenous rights. So before this current term, the Bolsonaro have given a lot of speeches declaring hostility over the indigenous people, and declared that not another square centimeters of indigenous land would be demarcated. And since the beginning, they try to reduce the power of the indigenous agents, national indigenous agents, and try to reduce the power of the enforcement agency, BAMA, even the other ones like the conservation units, ICMBio. And they try to put specific roles of FUNAI to the other ministries as the human, family, and human rights, and the other ones that sounds more strange, the MAPA, this agriculture ministry. So, and I would say another hostility is still having some government officers have still having speech against indigenous people or other indigenous national articulations as AFIB. So the remains violations. I would say the third one is a dubious changes in indigenous lands. FUNAI issued normative instruction number 9 that facilitate titling in some areas that indigenous people have looking for demarcation or homologation. So they are facilitating the titling for private properties. So, and this normative instruction is not considered the free prior informed consent. So they are not considered to reach or listen the indigenous people have their participation. The fourth one, it's the undermine the indigenous rights. Basically, there are a set of bills and constitutional amendments focus in the Amazon. So the House of Representatives working on them. Example, it's the legislative bill to replace what is called the MP da grilagem. Basically, it's land grabbing provisional measure. So that undermines the environmental governance because it threatens the indigenous people seeking the regularization, so the demarcation of their lands. And the fifth one, it's the unfortunately directly, but I know authoritarianism that the Bolsonaro administration have conducted this, the environmental topic, and state agents for environmental regulation, indigenous affairs have been populated by military personnel, top-down process imposed upon indigenous groups, difficulted dialogue, and the application of free prior informed consent. So thank you so much, and we will return to the big audience.
Welcome to the Colombian case. I'm Marta Rosero, and I'm in charge of this study case. Because we have just 10 minutes, I will dare to read the case, and you will follow the story through some images, okay? Thank you very much. Okay. Colombian Amazon is one of the better conserved portion of the basin. This has been the region in which guerrilla groups have used to hide, inhibiting national development initiatives such as mining or infrastructure. The 2016 peace accords, without the presence of the Colombian state in the territories previously occupied by guerrillas, have only encouraged the incursion of land dispossession and the excessive extraction of forest resources. After peace process, deforestation in the Colombian Amazon has tripled. 45% of the Colombian Amazon are protected areas and indigenous territories, which are now potentially or actively threatened. To be sure, there are reasons to be hopeful about the prospects for environmental governance in the Colombian Amazon. In Colombia, there are legal frameworks that have helped as platforms for effective environmental governance. First, the 1991 Constitution promotes citizen participation. Second, this Constitution recognizes indigenous people and Afro-Colombian peoples as citizens and their rights to make decisions and manage the collective territories they inhabit. In 2000, this was a good scenario for novel initiatives for biological conservation with the central participation of citizens. One of these strategies has been the Natural Park in the Huasi, the Sun's House in Inga language. It is a case with lessons learned for Colombia on environmental governance and conservation. This is the first national park declared due to the request of indigenous people. 70,000 hectares of a territory with high biological and cultural diversity were conserved. This is a conservation process with consultation and community participation. It has intercultural methodology to collect biological samples. Parks with the People's State Policy supported participation. It was a case presented at the World Parks Congress in Durban, South Africa in 2003. Also, it is considered an agreement among two different ontologies. Why? First, spiritual mapping of the territory were made with shamans. First Park Declaration Act includes shamanic codes, and this is the first co-management attempt with an indigenous group. But there is another reason to have some hope to sustain environmental governance initiatives. Recently, Santos, the president that achieved the peace process, publicly declared that the highway connecting the Andean region and the Amazon would not be built. Okay. However, today there are several aspects that threaten the effectiveness of environmental governance initiatives in the Colombian Amazon. I chose two key explanations on environmental governance. The state imposes development projects, and it goes hand in hand with the lack of state authority. And second, the lack of respect for indigenous people. Let's see the first one, the first two. Since the late 2000s, Colombian state has tended to exclude citizen participation and ignore indigenous social movements despite the constitution. For example, the response of indigenous people in Colombia has been to march in massive for multiple places, including the Amazon. In 2020, more than 10,000 indigenous people marched to Bogota due to the refusal of the current President Duque to meet for dialogue. This president preferred to take his helicopter and leave Bogota. He never met the citizens despite their efforts to walk thousands of miles to meet him. Another explanation for effective environmental governance is the lack of state authority, which is very clear seen in the Amazon today. The Colombian state does not occupy territories left by guerrilla. The territories are occupied by different new groups that threaten the environmental governance of parks like the Indiwasi and indigenous territories. Settlers, new settlers, appropriating valuable lands, new criminal groups, new drug trafficking groups, dissidents of the old guerrillas are some of the new actors in the region. But really, I don't want to refer to this new bloody period in the history of Colombia. Actually, during this period, more than 1,000 social leaders have been assassinated in Colombia. I want to refer rather to a learning process of Indiwasi that could help to build peace, and at the same time, it can help with the effectiveness of environmental governance. A second factor refers to the different ontologies of Western institutions and indigenous peoples in Colombia. While Western society follows a dualistic ontology, which presents differences between humans and nature, indigenous groups follow a relational ontology, which highlights social ecological relationships. Ontology term may seem an obscure abstraction, but it defines how environmental governance processes are understood and implemented in regions such as the Amazon. The Indiwasi Park process teaches that worldviews can come together and mutually recognize each other in the management of territories in the Amazon. A highly biodiverse forest can have spirits that inhabit it, and at the same time, it can be tangible, managed by respecting this vision. Today, the attitude of the Colombian state is to regress or go backwards. It is ignoring the mandates of the 1991 Constitution regarding citizen participation, and weakening effective governance experience and administrative infrastructure to ignore indigenous rights, and the need to have policies differentiated by the multiple worldviews. I would say it is a strategy to impose development projects. Okay? Thank you very much for being here in this group. Thank you.
Okay, should be recording now. So we missed for the record the initial part. But yeah, going again into the little background of my study area. For this work, I focus on the study of palms, which are species that are very abundant in the Amazon in general. And in Madre de Dios, I focus on 3 species. One of them is called Euterpe precatoria, is known as acai. I don't know if you hear about, probably. The other is called Mauritia flexosa. In Peru is known as aguaje. These specific species forms a groups of plants called aguajales that basically work as a wetland. And then we have another species very similar to acai, is called Oenocarpus batawa. So these palms, I chose them because they are highly abundant in these regions, and their products, which are called non-timber forest products, are widely used by indigenous and rural. Sorry, guys, it's my son. Okay, mi amor, anda con papá.
Pero esas son blancas. Entonces no lo puedo pintar.
Okay, don't worry. Sorry, guys. It's an unexpected visitor. Okay, I continue. So the products of these palms are known as non-timber forest products, and they are widely used by indigenous communities and rural communities. And specifically, I did interviews with different groups of people called stakeholders, which include indigenous communities, Andean settlers, NGOs, government agencies of the Peruvian government, and buyers of palm products. And so for this paper, we analyze explanations, why environmental governance is ineffective in terms of palm management in this region, and also in terms of management of natural resources, because in this area, the natural resources are very, very widely used. And so to start, because I think I just have a few minutes left, so to focus on environmental governance in this region, as I mentioned, palm management is shifting away from traditional practices, because in the past, palms were widely used by indigenous communities. We usually use them in traditional way, but because of developments, these practices has been being lost. And so the harvesting of some of these palm products are declining, and some harvesting practices are increasingly unsustainable. And these shifts in land use are driven by market processes and are occurring in a context where environmental governance is proving to be ineffective. So each case found 5 explanations, five main explanations of why environmental governance is ineffective. In the case of Peru, there is five explanations, as I mentioned. The first one is effects of economic integration, high commodity prices, weak state institutions, lack of project coordination, and limited monitoring. I'm going to explain each of them very briefly. And I don't know if we'll have a time for questions, but if you have questions, comments, suggestions, we can leave them for the moment when everybody's going to be in the general room. And so the first one, the effects of economic integration, is basically in terms of improved access to natural resources. Over the past 10 years, as I mentioned in the beginning, a key driver of change in Madre de Dios has been the development of the Interoceanic Highway. So the paving of this highway basically facilitates the migration of people from the Andes, who sometimes practice agriculture in different ways. And these groups of people include many who engage in informal or illegal gold mining activities. Then also deforestation has increased, especially in aguajales, in the Mauritia flexosa species. And also there has been an invasion of other lands with palms where forests were cleared for agriculture. So economic integration in general weakens or undermines palm management in communities, even if deforestation is not occurring. For example, several indigenous communities are abandoning traditional palm management because they want to move to cities to have access to better education and better economic alternatives. The second explanation, so supposedly we have to mention just two, but I wanted to give you a brief view, no, of all the explanations we found in this case. And then the second is high commodity prices. This is referring specifically to the demand for gold worldwide because it is very high. And so the gold prices are high, and therefore the informal and illegal activities of gold mining are increasing. So the population in Madre de Dios obviously found that gold mining is more profitable, no, than livelihoods alternatives. And because of this, they are invading protected areas, seeking gold or engaging in illegal trafficking of fuel and mercury to support these illegal mining activities. And specifically in Madre de Dios, gold mining is alluvial, and definitely it affects vast areas of aguajales, causing a huge damage in soils. So when mining activities occur, then the soil, it's really not productive anymore. So this causes a big damage on the environment. Then the third explanation is related to weak state institutions in terms of fragmented administrative structure of the Peruvian state. For example, in Madre de Dios, there is no clear chain of authority concerning to environmental regulation. And then because of this, there is a potential for corruption due to the presence of economic incentives for highly profitable activities like gold mining. No, and because of this, corruption happens because legislators, for example, will promulgate laws to regulate gold mining and will fail to adequately fund the implementation of these laws. This was a study by ex-TCD alumni too, Joanna Spin, in 2018. And then the law enforcement personnel will accept bribes. So there will be corrupted law enforcement personnel, will also tip off miners about impeding interdiction efforts. And then the fourth explanation, it's lack of project coordination, specifically between projects seeking to support palm management in Madre de Dios. And in general, projects exhibit a lack of systematic approach to capacity building or sustained implementation. And non-stakeholder involvement in general in governance processes is limited due to a lack of coordination among the state and other stakeholders. And finally, the last explanation of this ineffective environmental governance in this region is the limited monitoring, related specifically with low level of environmental monitoring by stakeholders. For example, palm governance in Madre de Dios, it's in general, in every project, is crucial to monitor management projects and other initiatives to evaluate their effectiveness. And if outside organizations cannot sustain monitoring, then the capacity building of communities for monitoring becomes crucial. So I think we have to come back to the room. Thank you.
On my dissertation work, and mostly the participant observation part of my dissertation work. So it's mostly qualitative and like personal reflections from what I saw during the years that I was there. So I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. I will appreciate if you can tell me if you see it fine.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, I didn't forget to record. So what I'm going to talk about is why I think there are problems with environmental governance in the Isiboro Sekure Indigenous Territory and National Park area, which is where I did my field work. I'm going to give you some context, then some signs of what I consider to be problems with environmental governance, and then go into the explanations for why I think it is the top explanations why I think there are problems with environmental governance in the area. So most of you, I think, probably know where the Tipnis is, but it's located at the very heart of Bolivia. It encompasses 3 different biomes, from the flodable savannas of the Llanos de Mojos, which are in the southern border of the Amazon and are basically a huge wetland, to the Andes foothills and the Subandean mountain range. So you have a 3,000 meter altitudinal gradient in the park, which makes it very biodiverse. And it's the territory of 3 different indigenous groups who have been living there for a long time, but through complicated patterns of migration, and they ended up coexisting in a multi-ethnic area pretty much because it is the last refuge for them to reproduce their culture in that region. So the Tipnis has been a national park since 1965, so pretty early for Bolivia. It is the 3rd national park. The first one was declared in 1939, and the Tipnis was the 3rd. And it became an indigenous territory decades later in 1999 in the context of the broader indigenous movements in the region and the championing of territorial indigenous rights. And then it entered an interesting process of developing tools for environmental management, basically internal zoning and management plans that were first carried on by the indigenous organizations themselves with help from NGOs, and then since the late 1990s in co-administration with the state, because that's kind of the period where Bolivia formed a national system of protected areas, and the service of protected areas was created. So since over 20 years, the area has been co-managed between indigenous people and the state. And as you can see in the map, basically the internal zoning defines regions where the communities are located, where you see the black dots, where people can pretty much hunt, fish, and do traditional uses of resources, but also have small plots for crops and some cattle ranching units. And then in the yellow areas, they can fish and hunt, but they cannot deforest to grow crops. And the core areas are in red, where they are spared for allowing animals and fish to reproduce, and because that's where the rivers are born. So those are the core areas of the park. The Tipnis is located in an area that is very isolated, but is subject to various pressures. There are cattle ranches inside and all around the Tipnis, and that's one of the oldest pressures that the area has faced, because all of those floodable areas have a lot of natural grasslands, and so it's a parts of it are very good for cattle ranching, and there are huge cattle owners in the area that want to gain access to the park. There is also in the southern border of the park a big colonization area where mostly highland migrants have settled to grow coca and other crops, and that, as if you see like the orientation of that polygon, it kind of follows the altitudinal gradient of the Andes foothills. So those are the areas that are optimal for growing coca. And the pressure goes from south to north inside the park. In the north, you have timber concessions, and since around 10 or almost 15 years now, you have a lot of oil exploration concessions that cover almost 45% of the deepness, even though there are no active oil exploration projects right now going on actively, but the concessions have been made to the national oil company to go and do that. And one of the greatest pressures that has created a lot of conflict recently is a road project that would bisect the area, and I'm going to go into more detail about that. So the road project is being, as you can see, sorry, in this map, that road project links the north and the south of Bolivia, and it's been projected for centuries. It's not a new project to link the markets, you know, all the cattle ranches of the north with urban markets. That's not a new project, but the area is so complicated and isolated and so contentious that for a long time it was abandoned. But under the government of Evo Morales in 2007, the project was put forward. And I'm not going to go into all the details of the conflict, but it's important to know that there was a lot of resistance against the project. Communities protested and marched against it, and they were violently repressed by the government, who used several legislative tools to move forward with the project, including a very criticized consultation process that was neither prior nor free nor informed, and that was, you know, observed by a lot of human rights groups as being what you should never do for a consultation process with indigenous people. So after the consultation, which said that the result was that people wanted the road, the government enacted a law that allows for private investment in the construction of infrastructure in the park. And since it has been, you know, there are accounts as that there are bridges being built so that the road is moving forward, but it does not have officially a budget attributed to it as of now. So officially it's not advancing, but the images, the satellite images show that there are some activities and there have been some accounts that that's happening. That is the broad context of the case. And I was there between 2015 and the last time I entered the territory was 2018. Lately, I've been in contact with indigenous leaders, but I haven't been to the area. So there are things that I don't know exactly how they're going, especially with the pandemic and everything going on, and the political turmoil that we've had in the country, as you have in the US. It's been a couple complicated years. But what I observed and what I think is still going on from conversations that I've had with people directly there or close to the case is that management plans that were developed during the 90s and the early 2000s are not being implemented and have not been updated. Indigenous communities rarely meet, they do not attend gatherings that used to be every year. And the Service of Protected Areas does not patrol the territory anymore, which has created a lot of rejection from communities who see them as opportunistic because they have a salary and they don't do their jobs, and also because they participated in that highly criticized consultation process that I just mentioned as guides to the government brigades that went into the communities to do the consultation. So that was a breaking point between local communities and the Service of Protected Areas, which is really a shame because it took years to build that relationship and build trust between those actors. And I have a message that I have just 1 minute to finish. So I'm going to go over just very briefly over the reasons why I think this has happened. And mainly, I would say that the political pressure to fracture and fragment indigenous organizations and communities is behind most of the damage that you see and the social fabrics that have been torn. It is not only external pressure, as I see it. It's a process that has been going on for decades too. Here I have followed the the progressive divisions of organizations that date back to the 90s, but clearly in the last years you have an acceleration of that and a polarization, because maybe before you had differences in terms of how they approached their rights to certain resources or their visions for how to manage a certain river basin, but now it's clearly like I'm with the government or with this party or with the opposition, and those that polarization that exists at national level has translated also to the territory and has been very detrimental to environmental governance. And the second big reason that is pretty clear, but I think it's important to highlight, is the state authoritarianism behind all these processes that has imposed a development agenda on indigenous communities and peoples and decreased their autonomy and self-determination levels. Very paradoxically, right? Because this mostly happened during the time that we had a self-defined indigenous government. But sectoral legislation has been passed to promote extractivism in indigenous territories. Instruments like the impact assessment of environmental impact.
Welcome back, everyone. And I apologize for the technical difficulties, but we were able to figure out. And hopefully you get a little bit of a taste of each case. Like, unfortunately, like I said before, we don't have time to cover all 5 cases that we use in our paper, but at least you get to listen and talk to one of the authors of the cases. And what I'm gonna do next is briefly invite for the group to have an idea of some of the explanations of ineffective governance, is to invite each author of a case to very briefly explain 2 of the top explanations of ineffective governance in the case. And we'll start with Andrea.
Thank you, Pilar.
Thank you.
I apologize to my group because I didn't really have time to finish. I was cut mid-sentence because I talked too much. But the 2 explanations that I was outlining, and I would like to share with the rest of the attendees in the case that I studied for my dissertation, which is an indigenous territory in a protected area in the Bolivian Amazon, is that the government of the past 15 years pressured indigenous organizations to accept a development agenda crystallized with surrounding a highway project. So in order to do that, they pushed for fragmentation and division, divide and conquer kind of strategy, and they were very successful at it. So that fragmentation of local organizations, I think, in my view, is what is hindering most environmental governance as of now. So the 2 reasons would be that fragmentation and the state authoritarianism that is behind it.
Thank you so much, Andrea. And now, please, Marlies, if you can briefly explain the 2 top explanations of ineffective governance in your case.
Okay, sure. Yeah, I also want to apologize to my group because we couldn't finish the whole material. But anyhow, so I think that the 2 top of why governance is not effective in the region is, the first one, I need to agree with Andrea, saying that there is a concern in the Bolivian state which has exhibited authoritarian tendencies toward local stakeholders. In my case, I'm talking about like the big dams, the big infrastructure that had been already built in the Madeira River, and the other 2 that are planned. So basically, the Bolivian government between 2006 and 2019 had been characterized by being very highly centralized and authoritarian. And also their discourse had been changed since 2009, when the government sought to have Brazil pay for the impacts of the Santo Antonio Giro Dam, but then they just remained quiet until the beginning of 2016, when the Bolivian state agreed to go forward with the binational Ribera Preto and Cachola Esperanza Dam, and everything without consulting with the communities already affected by the Santo Antonio and Girao dams. And despite all the warnings by scientists and conservation NGOs about negative social and ecological impacts, including loss of fisheries and flooding and health threats. And the second one I will say is, a second explanation, the concern high-level negotiations between national governments to advance in infrastructure projects. So the negotiations between governments and inhibit cross-scale communication and exclude local stakeholders, hinder their participation and results in a lack of transparency. It's been a dispute with the two countries, reflecting a high-level struggle over energy, in which Bolivia at the beginning of 2009 sought to include the impacts caused by the Girao and Santo Antonio dams in the negotiations, even though IBAMA at that time also said that the Girao will cause negative effects, not just in Brazil, but also in Bolivia and possibly in Peru. They didn't go forward on that. Until today, Brazil is still denying all bad effects. And the major flood in 2014 caused by retaining water behind Girao and Santo Antonio led to loss of livelihood in the Bolivian communities. So this lack of an enforcement mechanism is in agreement between Bolivia and Brazil, made it impossible for Bolivia to seek reparations for the harm caused by the built dams.
Okay, thank you, Marlis. And now, Sinomar, if you can briefly talk about the two top explanations in your case. We are kind of running short of time, so please brief.
Yes, it happens the same with me. Sorry for my guests. Basically, this case is about the BR 319 in the southern of Amazonas and other Rondônia. But I say that the government taking some lacking transparency, issue public notes to paving the road without comply with the environmental license and the social components and the lack of free prior informed consent. So listen, the indigenous people surround this highway. And the second one, it's about the since the beginning or before the government starts, the current government, the Bolsonaro government. So we have this hostile speech, and the first step trying to move all the indigenous agents affair to the, especially to the agriculture ministry. So I would say this is some speech against indigenous from governmental officials, you know.
Thank you, Sinomar. And now, Marta, please, like briefly, the two explanations for environmental, ineffective environmental governance in your case.
Okay. I chose two. The state-imposed development projects that goes hand in hand with the lack of state presence. And the second one is the lack of respect for indigenous ontologies. Even if in the past, Colombia has been pioneer in participatory conservation strategies, such as the creation of national parks with indigenous people, jointly with civil society groups and the state. Yeah, the government right now, the current government, do not recognize grassroots movements, and also they have no presence in the Colombian Amazon, and have left open room for new guerrilla groups and also drug trafficking and so on. Yeah, and this new state do not recognize all these efforts in the past for for participatory approaches for conservation. Also, these participatory approaches for conservation could achieve to negotiate among two ontologies, two different type of ontologies, or ways to see the world and act in the world, like the Western and the indigenous ontologies, which could be a platform for peace in order to make participatory approaches for co-management of protected areas. And right now, it is also complete erase of these kind of frameworks, and also to weaken the administrative entities with such concept of ontology. They do not recognize this anymore. Thank you.
Thank you, Marta. And then finally, Angelica, please briefly your two explanations.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you to my group, and sorry for the technical difficulties, but we were able to cover the 5 explanations, and I'm going to mention the two principal explanations in my case. No, the first one is the effects of economic integration, specifically in terms of improved access to natural resources, and specifically in the region that I work in, Madre de Dios. The key driver of change has been the development of the Interoceanic Highway that has created many social, economical, ecological changes. And so in general, the economic integration undermines palm management in communities, even if deforestation is not occurring. And then the second explanation, to be brief, is the weak state of institutions, specifically in terms of fragmented administrative structure of the Peruvian state. And because in Madre de Dios, there is no clear chain of authority concerning to environmental regulation. And because of this, there is a potential for corruption due to the presence of economic incentives for highly profitable activities like gold mining. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So at least you could get a little bit of an idea of what these ineffective governance explanations are for each case. These are the broader explanations, which in the paper we treat 5 for each case, but you only got to hear 2 today. And then what we did was basically link these explanations to our list of governance criteria that I presented earlier. And this is just for you to see the process, how we did it. And we end up with this graph here, in which we see the top violations of governance criteria across the 5 cases. And as you see, transparency and accountability are the most frequently violated criteria. And just to compare a little bit with your answers, I'm surprised that it's not as different as I thought. And it seems that for you, transparency is also the top criteria that is violated in your field work. So that's pretty interesting. And I'm gonna just leave Martina, which is the person that really worked on the conclusions of this paper, to cover them. And then we will have a Q&A and let you ask questions to us. Thank you.
Okay, hello everybody. I'm gonna try to be very brief. So as you can see, in each of the cases, there are violations of criteria of environmental governance effectiveness. The one thing that was like called our attention was the role of the state, the different role of the state, and the particular role of the state that we could see in the 5 different cases. As you can see there, in the Tipnis case and Rondonia, the state presented itself as authoritarian, and then we have a violent state in Colombia. In Upper Madera was more like an unresponsive, and similar to Peru, which the state was more absent. So one of the things that allows us, that was a question for us because of this prevalent role of the state, and also different role of the state in the different countries, is that most of the governance frameworks rely on assume more than rely that there is a legitimate state and that the political system is a democracy. And we know that in the case of Latin America, this is not always the case. So we thought that it was important to think about frameworks that are more focusing, analyzing the specificities of the global south, specifically in this case, the Amazon, of course, and then that they could also be more flexible to try to understand the history of colonialism and context of violence. And we also thought that these frameworks that we use were dominated basically by the Western rationalist thought, and they were not able to capture or to include what we can say indigenous relational ontologies. So one other thing that it was important for us was that we find these type of states that were authoritarian, and then also like deep inequalities in society and also context of violence, we thought that it was important to rely more into what we can say the theoretical frames from political ecology, so that we can in a way capture more of these social phenomena that we weren't able to conceptualize by using these frameworks. Then we thought that it was also important to have a more critical assessment about the criteria for governance, because sometimes we find out that as we were doing a comparative analysis, we were using these criteria, but not always, the frameworks themselves were not meaning the same things by using the equal terms, right? So we started questioning about like, okay, we are talking about transparency, but are these frameworks meaning the same thing for transparency? And are we using transparency in the same way or interpreting transparency in the same way? And are we able to compare transparency in the different cases? So the last thing that we think it's important about as a general conclusion, and something that maybe we would like to keep working on, is that these frameworks are more like, we can use them more like as a checklist, as you can see what we did in the methodology, like we try to see if these criteria were present in their cases or not. But we started asking about like, what if, that we need something more holistic, right? That we need to actually think about, for example, how can we make the criteria to interact, right? And so, for example, if we think about transparency in the different cases, which was a common problem, how do we understand transparency in a context of authoritarianism? And I think that's all for the conclusions. And there are more details about this in the paper, but these were kind of the questions that we had after the analysis that we made.
Okay, so thank you so much everyone for listening and specifically for the TCD to support our working group so we can keep working on this, and we are hopefully gonna be publishing it thanks to the TCD, and also to provide us this space to share our resource and our paper and hear your feedback. We are interested to think what are your perspectives. So any question that you have, we'll be happy to, or comment that we have, we'll be happy to listen and to discuss a little bit. Thank you everyone for listening and for presenting too. Thank you.